Well, you know what? I did. I turn over the lights, so I don't know.
If I can help.
I mean, I. Home, yes, yes. I'm gonna call. Housing? That wasn't the one I was at though.
Okay, you know, I just.
Oh, yeah, yeah, that one, yeah. I think.
You know,
And then yeah, I think as far as oh, Kevin, no, I didn't. Okay, Maria, this is Mel.
Hi.
Sorry, I'm Maria. My best. My everything.
Yeah.
I love you. Yeah, I do too. I'm surprised. Well, yeah. Well, that's how Lauren. There's my
All right.
Don't like their. Oh, no. Here, do you want to say it's your mother?
What's the next picture? Good to see you. Is it hoping you still right? No?
I was following the chance.
Test, test, test. Test, test. Alrighty, greetings, everyone. Greetings. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. In the essence of time, I'm gonna be real respectful of your time. Got a few people coming in. I'll wait on that. Nobody wanted the leather chairs.
You're not my favorite. For the dignitaries.
You say the leather chairs for you guys.
Yeah, the judge, and we got the third, yeah, that's what they are, yeah. Heary, heary.
Biggest area got sit in front.
I haven't been an elected official in 10 years. Get back here.
Right, well, greetings, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. We're gonna jump right into it. But I first wanted to thank everybody for coming. This type of forum, we do these every month. Every month, I'm really excited to see the community come out. Our dignitaries come out, our people that work, whether you're in an elected official position or even our county prosecutor. I'm thankful because you guys continue to show that it's really important that you hear from the community, and we appreciate you being here. Without further ado, I want to just jump right in. We have our friends here from the Michigan. I'm sorry, let me get a card here. Yes, so many acronyms in my head. The Michigan Center for Youth Justice. They're here to give a presentation, and we're here to talk about juvenile justice. As you all know, and nothing's perfect, and so the juvenile justice system, or the justice system, period, is a very contentious topic. There's some good, there's some bad, and that means there's some work to do. And so we're here to talk about specific legislation that just came down in November of last year. That specifically addresses juvenile justice. It was a package of 12 bills, 19. Man, I need to do my homework. But a great opportunity for us to come together and talk about that legislation. And so they prepared a presentation for us. And so we're going to jump right into that.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Denise Dorsey. For those of you who don't know, I am the Outreach and Advocacy Manager for Michigan Center for Youth Justice. And today I have two of my beloved co-workers here with me. Ms. Jen Peacock, she is our Policy Director, and also our intern, Ms. Tashfia Gilu. She's currently a master's student at University of Michigan, and she's also here with us tonight, so I'm very grateful that she is here. So tonight, even though we have a presentation on the new juvenile justice bills that were signed into law in December, we want to spend the most part of our evening having a community conversation collectively about what we can do as a community to implement some of these new bills here. No juvenile justice system looks alike, and we know Saginaw is unique to Genesee County, Oakland County, Macomb County, so we know there's no one blanket response to how we can work on juvenile justice here. But at the end of the day, I believe that everyone in this room cares about kids, and so that's why we are out here tonight. So, just a quick overview tonight. Some of the goals of our presentation tonight are just to give you an overview of the juvenile justice reforms, some of the state level work that is going on currently for implementation, and then we would like to explore local priorities here in Saginaw County. So the Juvenile Justice Reform Task Force was established by executive order in July of 2021. It was comprised of 23 individuals across the state that are in all different facets of juvenile justice. There were attorneys, there were behavioral mental health therapists, there were judges, there were elected officials. The lieutenant governor was the chair of this committee, and they met consistently for over a year. The final report was issued in July of 2022 with 32 consensus-based recommendations to the governor, and several of those recommendations were translated into legislation included in the bill package. So on December 12, 2023, our lieutenant governor signed the majority of Justice for Kids and Communities bill package was signed into law. The only one that was not signed was House Bill 4630, which included funding for youth legal representation to establish training standards for the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission. So even though that one did not pass this time, that is something that is still a priority for us that we are still working on currently at MCYJ. The effective date for all changes of these bills is October 1st, 2024, with exception to the Office of the Children's Ombudsman. And so now Jan will talk about those policy reforms.
All right, so to be fair, there is a lot to this. Like I said, there was 19 bills that passed. So this will be considered high level, but up here, if you want more information, I do have printouts that also explain the anticipated impact. So if you think I'm missing something, please know we're just so stretched because we can talk all day about one thing up here. But I really want to dive in first and foremost to what we consider at MCYJ one of the most transformational things for both our kids and our communities, and that's enhancing the child care fund. So the child care fund is actually how our JJ system is primarily funded. Local jurisdictions put up their money up front, and then eligible expenses are reimbursed at 50% by the state. So you could imagine that for things like out-of-home placement, for things like detention, and also things like community-based care, probation, and kind of full gamut of how it's funded, right? This reform did something very cool in the sense that it just shifted our the incentives for community-based care by increasing that reimbursement rate to 75% for those local programs, right? So it's encouraging counties to expand their service menu that's actually offered at home. Long term, the goal is really to see not only that cost savings, right? So it'll be more fiscally effective to have those community-based programs, but it's also to see that reduction of detention use to align with best practices. It also expands the child care fund to allow things like pre-arrest diversion. So before having charges referred to the court, so when kids are showing signs of maybe that risky behavior, they can access those CCF programs that are shown to really work for kids. And it also, I already mentioned pre-arrest diversion. It also expands the definition of community-based care to include things like shelter and emergency shelter and respite care to give alternatives to confinement for kids who might not necessarily need intensive out-of-home placement, right? The next bucket is risk and needs assessment. So the child care fund legislation actually required minimum standards of best practices statewide, right? So trying to build that floor while also not being too prescriptive, right? Here in Saginaw, like Sam mentioned, your kids have unique needs. And so the courts and court administrators, jurisdictions need to have that autonomy to develop this really relevant community-based program while still upholding some consistency and best practices for our kids across the state. And so this means implementing things like validated risk screenings and assessment tools to inform things like diversion, which is intended to be that light touch, right? We're trying to divert kids away from the JJ system. Consent calendar, detention, and dispositional decision. So these assessments are intended to match kids with the appropriate services based on the risk of things like reoffending and just unique needs that each young person has. The language in the legislation also stipulates that the state court administrative office will really help determine that detention screening tool, because right now that seems to be, from what we're hearing, the piece that we really want to support on. Just to ensure that we have all that relevant information before we enroll a young person into a facility. And the legislation, again, is not so prescriptive that it names what explicit tools need to be used, just that caveat of validated and evidence-based. So there's primarily like 3 in the state of Michigan that a lot of counties use, that all of which would meet the criteria for the legislation. And then I would say the next big bucket that I think is really relevant to Saginaw is expanding diversion opportunities, right? So diversion, expand those opportunities for pre-court diversion, in particular consent calendar, which is similar to diversion in that it's kind of like that informal doc, so it's not that full process of going through the system for a young person. And diversion plays out really differently across the state, and so that is an exciting part of this work where communities to really get together and explore what does it look like to serve our kids even more upstream than we already are, prevent that deepening juvenile justice involvement. And then the next big bucket, which we were so proud of, because this has been a long time advocacy effort for MCYJ, was eliminating all Lyme disease associated juvenile justice involvement apart from restitution and the Crime Victims' Rights Fund. So in Michigan, kids across the state were amassing very high volumes of juvenile court debt, everything from DNA testing to actually being placed out of the home, anywhere from $315 a day. We've seen upwards of $615. We've got families that had $100,000+ of juvenile court debt, some from decades ago, right? Because there's no clear process on how families can get that waived. When in a moment of crisis or stress, families should really want to be able to rely on those invested in a child's rehabilitation, not fearing a bill. And so we know every county is different, and Macomb County eliminated some time ago, so there really isn't a uniform process, and that was the big challenge. And so youth will still be held accountable, but not through means of cost. And so that was another one that we were really excited about. Now I'm going to kick it back to Nina.
So some of the newly enacted policy reforms are the Office of the Child Advocate. This renames and expands the role of the Office of the Children's Ombudsman. Again, that one will not go into effect. It did go into effect, okay. The State Appellate Defender Office expands SADO to include appellate services for youth, which will include post-dispositional services. There's a waiver to the adult system, which adds developmental factors that judges must consider in making waiver or designation decisions. And then residential family per diem rates makes changes to support NDHHS to respond in a more flexible way to bed shortages, staff retention challenges, and service needs. And some of the questions that you may have for some of these, we will not have all of the answers tonight because these things are being written in real time and things are still changing. So this is just an overview of what has been done so far.
Yep. So to Nina's point, these things have been in conversation for a long time. There have been conversations around implementation since before the bill had actually been passed, right? Because courts knew this would be a significant shift. And I'm sure a lot of folks in this room know hearing this, it's a lot. And so one big bucket we wanted to talk about is the Child Care Fund Advisory Committee that's happening in real time. So this committee is really focusing on, it's mostly through Department of Health and Human Services and other database system stakeholders. And their task is to really implement these changes that we talked about for the Child Care Fund. And these are kind of the 4 committees you see up here. I would say that the handbook is an essential part to this conversation, and part of the reason why when we talk about community-based care, we might not have a ton of answers right now because the committee is really exploring all of the policies that need to be updated in that handbook to really decide how this funding is going to be spent and what these dollars can and can't be used for. But local system stakeholders are really looking into the ways the handbook will guide the decision making, right? Because where you invest your money is a really big aspect to this work. We're talking about keeping our kids home and in communities as often as we can. The annual plan and budget committee, they're really trying to streamline that budgeting process because it can be a bit of a challenge, and having those managing the timelines and data insights, the whole spectrum there. And another key bucket, of course, is monitoring and review, right? So how do we make sure that review process that DHHS undertakes with local jurisdictions ensures that they're really complying with those CCF rules and really refining the on-site review procedures that were outlined in the legislative reforms. And I would say the big one that I'm most excited to see how it shakes out is that program eligibility, right? There is that stipulation of evidence-based practices. And so how are we going to make sure communities are aware of what is considered research-based and evidence-driven, so we all have a uniform definition. For existing programs that might not meet that criteria, how do they navigate that process and what is their clear path forward? But then also they are discussing creating a really cool rate clearinghouse, right, with all these other program options that our counties can look to serve as a guide. And I think that will be one of the most helpful and exciting parts. brainstorming together to see what folks can do.
So currently there is what's called the Michigan Juvenile Justice Partnership Committee at the statewide level. And this is with SCALE, which is the State Court Administrator's Office. There's the Data and Quality Assurance Work Group, and they are going to ensure that juvenile justice information is defined and interpreted in a uniform way across the state, and that the collection and sharing of data is accurate and timely. Again, like Jim was talking about, those evidence-based programs. Right now, there's not a clear definition for what exactly is considered an evidence-based program, but that is something that this work group will help to determine. So like she said, across the board, we know what programs, what organizations are eligible for those funds from the Child Care Fund. The training work group will develop a cohesive strategic plan for juvenile justice training for stakeholders to ensure clear and consistent training. And then there's also the policy and procedure work group that will discuss implementation of the policy and procedural changes that would be required by the juvenile justice reforms recommended by the task force.
I know this is so many committees, y'all, I'm sorry. But it just goes to show how many folks are on deck and really diving into these reforms. The next, I think this is the last committee we're talking about. But the next piece is the conversation around residential, right? So these are those designed to be longer term spaces for young people in need of rehabilitative services, right? So detention is often intended to be short term. These are those longer facilities that kids may spend time in. So staffed by DHHS, but it is comprised of a lot of different court folks, advocacy groups, impacted families make up this, we call it kind of the RAC. Child welfare, private providers, the full gamut of folks make up this committee, and they're really looking at to see how, as we just kind of made this shift, right, that community-based focused system that has an emphasis on keeping kids at home rather than confinement, child caring institutions like residential treatment centers, what does out-of-home placement in the larger system actually kind of look like for youth who will still find themselves in need of that longer-term rehabilitative care? So the first bucket is residential. Our wonderful executive director, Jason Smith, is actually one of the co-chairs of this committee. So I just want to shout him out. That man is running on this committee. It's all over the place. But they're really exploring things like placement criteria, offense type, demographics. What are those baseline service arrays that residential placement should be providing to our kids, right, all around the state? What do young people need? I also know they discuss reentry and sort of what do these young people need when we want them to come back into our community, right? We want them to reintegrate back into school and continue any necessary treatment. So what does that actually look like from day one? Bed management, I'm fortunate enough to get to be in on these conversations, and it's really all about developing that system so that across the state, local jurisdictions, DHHS, and other folks have an understanding of what beds are actually available, so we can cut down and save time, because right now it's really tough for folks to access that information. And we want kids to get their care, right? And so also, as noted up here, things like case reviews, data collection, and what does that mean to have a kind of unified data collection for bed management? And what does that look like? Because that's really important information for folks to know, for our kids. The next bucket is case management standards, so focusing in on case management while youth is placed in a facility, but having this idea that reentry starts at day one, right? So there should be a case management protocol that is focused on helping a young person address their needs and placement, but putting things into place to prepare them for returning home. So that's things like consistent assessments, those tailored services, quality assurance. And then, of course, detention, which is tasked with creating that plan for detention facilities to have that high quality, safe care and expanding regional support services and alternative placement options. They're also exploring things like admissions criteria or baseline training for staff.
And just to piggyback on Jen, for that residential advisory committee, we do have someone from Saginaw that sits on that statewide committee as well, and she is here tonight. Ms. Sandra Lindsay from the Saginaw Community Mental Health. So it's good to have people in our own community sitting on those committees that is getting that firsthand information that can bring it back to us for implementation. So we were talking about the child care fund earlier and what implementation looks like. Like Jen mentioned earlier, prior to the passing of the bills, it was a 50-50 split, and now it is 75-25. And so in Macomb County, they have some programs that are supported by their child care fund that offer homework support, individual and family therapy, vocational services, multi-systemic therapy, in partnership with Macomb Community Mental Health, recreational activities, expanded diversion options, and they already have eliminated juvenile court fines and fees in alignment with state reform. A little bit closer to home in Genesee County, there's a judge down in Flint, I cannot think of his last name, but his first name is John. And so he identified that there are usually 5 areas where he sees juveniles come into his court, and it is disjointed family structure, unmet educational needs, marijuana or substance abuse, encounters with guns, and mental health. So they have created some programming around those 5 particular needs in Genesee County, and this program is called Accountability and Incentives Management Program. So the participants are low-risk youth as determined by a risk and needs assessment. The court administrators are also working with the parents to hold youth accountable. They reward youth who don't violate probation and sanction, and those who do, they remove something from them, for example, the opportunity to attend a football game. The program already has led to a 30% reduction in the number of youth who have been detained for technical violations and status offenses. Ms. Rhonda Im, who is the family court administrator in Genesee County, she's also partnered with Odyssey House, a substance abuse rehabilitation center, to offer treatment to court-involved youth. She's also partnered with Easter Seals in Genesee County because they have a big truancy problem, which we can agree in Saginaw, we have a truancy problem as well. And so they partner with Easter Seals, where Easter Seals will go to a home and pick up children that otherwise would not have transportation, and they take them to school. They offer some of those mitigating services for family and youth, including mental health services, some of those other wraparound services that they're seeing that youth need in Genesee County. So these are just a couple examples of programs that are being funded through the Child Care Fund in their communities.
I know we're really speeding through it, y'all, thank you, but this is kind of one of the last things we wanted to kind of touch on. So there were 32 of those recommendations that were published from the task force. Not all of them, of course, were done in the legislative package. Some of them also don't require statute changes, right? So they don't necessarily require any type of legislative action. Counties can just kind of dive into some of these recommendations. And this is one of those recommendations that I know MCYJ is really interested in exploring with counties, which is this idea of a cross-system collaborative. So this idea of creating a place where juvenile justice court stakeholders, child welfare, community mental health can really come together to talk about coordinating services and things like the child care fund, and making sure those dollars are really, really leveraged, right? And so a lot of communities actually already have these human services collaboratives that they can incorporate in the work that they're already doing, to really try to provide, I would say, holistic, could be an accurate word, I would say, when we're talking about this work. And I know we threw a lot at you, and so I do apologize that we kind of moved through that pretty fast, but I think just remembering at the core of this legislation, the way we often talked about it with our folks at, MEFTA, and which is the Michigan Association for Family Court Administrators, the acronym, is just really, you could view it as building a floor of care, because we have a decentralized system in the state of Michigan, so what's happening in Saginaw isn't happening in Washtenaw, where I live. So how do we establish a baseline form of care so our kids can have some consistency, but still allow for local flexibility and innovation that you all need to create these really cool opportunities. Because I know I've heard from Danita and from some folks interested in things like diversion programs and just really great opportunities for collaboration. So I just wanted to flag that this was a lot of information, but it's a really cool opportunity. And implementation is not something that October 1, boom, it's done. This is a multi-year, years project. So that just means you all are getting in on it really, really early, which is great. And I think we have one question we wanted to pose, and our intention from the MCYJ perspective is we are in a lot of different committees. We partner with a lot of different local counties. So we're trying to just really listen and absorb what folks at the local level are saying, because we do sit in kind of every spectrum of different state agencies to really have these deep dive conversations. And so the more informed we are, the better. And so it's kind of an initial icebreaker question, and then I know Danita will probably dive into kind of the broader conversation with Saginaw. I think it was our intent, yeah. So just wanted to flag it.
So our questions tonight for all of you here, we have county commissioners, we have elected officials, we have our county prosecutor here, we have some judges, we have community mental health people who are dealing with our kids across the spectrum. So we want to know, what are you most interested in based on what you heard, and what are the next steps to move it forward here in Saginaw?
Maybe the referral process for diversion programs, like who would make those referrals? Would it, I know if it's if it's with diversion, like you don't want the court to be involved yet, you want to get that before that happens. And maybe I'm asking a question too ahead, but like, how would they get that referral to know where to go or what services are available? Do you know what I mean?
I hear what you're saying. I'm pretty sure, I'm going to fact check myself when I get on the Wi-Fi. The legislation did expand who actually can make those referrals, but now it's kind of a new ballgame in the sense that before folks weren't getting funding for pre-arrest diversion, but upstream fees. So to your point, that is going to be a key part of this, is exploring what does it actually look like. In some counties, there's just a big variation. So thank you for saying that.
As a previous social worker transition coordinator at the Juvenile Detention Center School, I worked with the youth that were out there, a lot of the staff that are here. And I know that there are some evidence-based models and practices and emerging practices that are not culturally responsive to certain youth. And I'm hoping that they would use some of that opportunity to research some of those programs and practices and those evidence-based models, to bring those so that they are culturally competent and relevant to the youth in the various different communities.
In Saginaw and not in Rochester. The difference. Right. And I want to say, I'm sorry, but is any of the policies able to be incorporated like into schools before, like seeing something happening in a child, to be referred to some of these agencies before we get to incarceration or whatever.
Yeah.
It seemed like some of these policies would work before something devastating happened, and incorporating something to the school system might help.
I'm all about prevention. I appreciate that. And what's exciting is we just had a call today about possibly trying to partner with a couple of school justice-driven organizations on a webinar to talk about how can we build out partnerships funded through the child care fund with schools?
Yes.
Because we see that connection too.
Yes.
And so that's something that I think is really new. I think it'll take time, but I think it's conversations people really, really want to have. So I'm with you, and when we get that webinar going, I will share it like wild, because I think that's so important.
And that's one of the main recommendations of that cross-system collaborative. It would be people from schools talking to the Juvenile Detention Center and talking with the social workers who are already dealing with these families, so that everybody who is dealing with this young person are all sitting at the table collectively, so that collectively we are coming up with a wraparound approach for this individual young person. And hopefully and that someone else is at the table, that it will be culturally responsive to that particular young person that we're dealing with, and not just a blanket response for all of our youth.
I'm good.
Good time.
Nobody else say that. So, my name is Demond Tibbs. I started with Saginaw Defender's Office here in the county. And the whole purpose okay, so the whole purpose for that office to be developed is part of this recognition of criminal defense. Because we all heard about the connotation as far as court-appointed attorneys. And so there was a national study done as far as the representation that individuals were receiving for those who can't hire paid attorneys, even though paid attorneys are often on the appointed attorney list. They were saying that they were not getting the appropriate amount of justice or representation. And so Michigan legislation saw that and they made a correction. And so what I think was most important is that this was a Republican-led representation. So in other words, when people think about pro-defense and pro-police, they see it as a Republican and a Democratic issue, but it's not necessarily the case. But there was a commonality in that justice or criminal justice, that's like what the third highest budget expense on a state's legislative budget. So that's something that Democrats and Republicans want to address as far as where are we spending our tax dollars. And so the Republican-led governor who signed the bill and the Republican-led legislation agreed that, okay, maybe we should do something different than the $35,000 being paid to send somebody to prison. Maybe there are some local programs that can be funded or be educated on to avoid that expense. And so that's why my office was created, to address that issue as far as representation. And we have a lot of attorneys here who are part of that list who understands that. So there's, as far as court-appointed attorneys, as far as that change in representation, that no longer exists. Judges do not appoint representation for indigent criminal defendants. And that's to avoid that conflict. But the point is that there was an issue that was addressed. Michigan was probably at the bottom or close to the bottom as far as representation that was presented or given to individuals who deserve representation. And so that's why it was funded and my office was created. So now it is being extended to the juvenile court system. So my office will be eventually include juvenile representation, which I had represented a few myself.
It already does. Please see.
Yes, Judge Mayor, I agree. It does. And it's going to expand.
We're looking forward to that.
And so it's just that it's part of being educating the public that your legislation agreed that their change should be made, and it's being changed. And so part of that change is that, and which we've been discussing about, is that I guess I would call it like soft changes as far as that communicating with the community, and that's where our social workers come in. Our social workers know a lot about what programs are out there for our community to assist these individuals to address the situations that they're dealing with, family issues, school issues, things of that sort. And so a lot of times there's some people who don't think that's a justified cost. And so that's part of the change, is that a lot of times people get comfortable as to where we were and not want to be comfortable with the change. And so if you're comfortable with the individuals who are leading that change and you in their ear about making sure that change exists, then you should get behind these legislative changes that are being implemented, because it took years for this to occur. And you have to, in my opinion, there has to be a newfound respect for those who represent indigent criminal defendants, social workers, even police officers. They do some dirty work. They do work that we don't want to be involved in. But if you don't support the police officers, you don't support the social workers, that's why you see these situations that we're in. But you just got to get the dollars behind it. So I appreciate this forum in that it's educating us, but we also have to look at where the rubber meets the road. And social workers, police officers, judges, indigent criminal defendants, that's where the rubber meets the road. And so communication like this is appropriate for us.
Thank you.
I know I was one of the last people to get there. But, sometimes y'all dealing with some of these other things out here than you, but, I guess I had to say something on that because the last three discussions have been, really, important to me. And basically, first of all, the discussion was raising the question. And then part of this, right after that, it was, oh, I like this because you're dealing with prevention. And then the support. So that's good because the people that we have here, you know, you say, okay, we got law enforcement people, we got social workers, and all of that. And that's what some of us have been saying all the time, that they need to merge together. And you know, that's what we've done with the churches over the years. You know, when you go through and if somebody do a speech, they never do a bad speech because there's so many things there to let them know how well they did on something. The other thing is my director of the health department is here, and she knows, you can tell her, she can tell you that I went into the meeting saying, how can we get prevention programs? I kept saying that, but the regulation wouldn't let us do it. Okay, we get all this money from mental health, but regulations keep us from doing some of it because we've got to deal with, you know, the medical part of mental health. So that's probably not the right word. You know, we got to deal with them after they get into a problem situation. But when you say, okay, I like this because I like it, because if you deal with the part that you are interested in today, we might not have some of the other problems that we've got to spend the money on. So I'm glad to see, well, two things. I'm glad to see CAP pull this program together. And I'm glad to see the people that came to the program tonight because they had some interest in the subject. So these are some things from, what do we call it, grassroots, that we've been out here trying to do for a long time. I'm just not plugging for myself. I do the actual program. And that's one of the reasons I do it. Because I can catch a young person, and we always want to deal with their parents and anybody else that they know. Because that's how we put all of this together for the development and prevention. So I'm just glad to see it. And wish you to continue to fight for this.
And I'll say, what he's saying, Mr. Pugh is saying is, this is not new. What's not new? That somebody came up with the idea that they put a whole bunch of people and use the same abused people. You know, why would you do prevention first? What's the point? All of this money and y'all can't get into schools. That their parents are messed up. Why this is so big, you know, why the kids need so much is because their parents need it. Their parents is too young to raise good citizens, right? So when the kids get to school, after watching Housewives, love the hip hop and cussing, and a parent on fentanyl, come on, help me. I love what he knows, but this is not new for Saginaw. It's not new for Saginaw, and I'm not talking about something getting done because nothing ever got done. People just made money helping people that weren't in trouble. And more people get in trouble, and more people get in trouble. That's all. I'm sorry. But I love this city. I've seen him work. I've seen him work. I know you. And my heart breaks for the children. And we talking about, actually, to me, it looks like we like teaching them how to be prisoners. Orderly. Orderly like though. We're gonna get them in the juvenile thing and then help them know how to act right. You know, let's get them when they hungry, cause they mama on dope and they cousins is doing something to them.
I apologize if I touch on some things, touching on what each and every person that just spoke on saying. I myself have had the opportunity to kind of work in 3 areas of what we were speaking about today. I work in the school system, I work in prevention, and now I'm working in law. But what I find is we've had prevention programs here in Saginaw for quite some time. And I feel like that where the need is most needed, which is in the communities I grew up in, the Saginaw Public School District, where, again, like I said, the need is most needed. Those are the hardest areas of people to get to collaborate. Like these programs have not been offered to the school system. They have. I've personally sat there when these programs have been offered to Saginaw Public School Districts, and they turned it down. However, we outsource to other areas such as Birchland, Carlton, Saginaw Township. But the public system didn't feel that there was a need for these programs in their schools when their children were the most needed. This is where they really needed these opportunities to have an opportunity to stay in school when they made a mistake. There's programs out there that keeps kids in school, keep them from being expelled, teaching that they're taking courses. There are courses to be offered of reform versus expulsion, where our kids are left at home by themselves. Parents have to work, regardless of anything. No matter how much you love your child, you have to provide for that child. So 9 times out of 10, parents are working. Kids don't have the opportunity to be at school, so where are they? They're hanging out in the streets. They're friends. They are putting themselves in more places to get in trouble. But we didn't stop it when we had an opportunity to prevent that. It was just easier to say, get out of school. I don't have time for this. Your problems are just too much for us. These are still our kids. Whether they're not personally yours, they're still the kids that you know. They're your neighbors. They're the kids you see at the neighborhood store. They're the kids you're rooting for on the basketball teams and things like that. So how do we get this program into the areas that is most needed? Because they seem to be the people who are not accepting. They're the people that are not accepting this help. These other people, and I'm not saying they don't have a need either, because every child isn't great in Birchland. Every child isn't great out here in Carlton or Saginaw Township. But we see more of our kids out here not having the opportunity to be in school, getting sent over to alternative schools when that wasn't even necessary. We're putting intelligent kids in alternative schools where they're not even getting the basic education that they need. I'm sorry, I work in alternative too. They're not getting the basic education because teachers are fighting with them. Everybody wants to show out with their friends because now we're given an opportunity to be with who? The kids who don't want to be reformed. Every child is not that child. They're not that child. Some children just need a little guidance. Some children just need a little reforming. And our district is the one who does not accept the help. So how do we get them the help? That's what I'm asking.
I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is Todd Borders. I'm the court administrator for 10th Circuit Family Division. I'm probably the guy that you want to ask all the questions of. In terms of where we're at with our kids, what we can offer our children, what we plan to do to address the legislation that's coming down. I came out here tonight, we were asked by Mr. Bowles to just come over and to address and participate, and Judge Meter certainly wants to do that. The team that we have here tonight is Judge Meter. She is the sitting judge at the family division. She is the one that determines what happens with every kid that comes through the court system. We also have our detention leadership here, Keon Turner and Deidre Tyler. They've been long-term leadership at our detention facility. And then we have our probation officers that handle most of our case. So we've got Keela Thomas on the end. We've got Chanel Tyson in the second row and Sarah Lakowski. 3 of our 7 are here tonight. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm not going to take up a ton of time, but I think we can address every aspect of the law that is going into place October 1st, and I think it's fairly easy to do. Most of what Sandra Lindsay was involved in the committees was addressing the needs throughout the state. And unfortunately, some counties just don't do as well as others with juveniles. Does Saginaw have challenges with their youth? And the answer is yes. Do we have issues that existed 10 years ago that still exist today that haven't been solved? And the answer is yes. All right. Have we made progress and have we addressed issues? Commissioner Coney brought up that maybe more culturally sensitive, things in detention might do better. Well, since she left detention, I would challenge that we've addressed some of those things. And we can talk about every single one of those services that we have for kids. But if we want to address do you want me to address the legislation?
This is y'all's
Yes.
community. I'm here to chat.
Hey, you know what? Yeah, I'm not a Judge Meter allows me to address things, and I'm not afraid of tough questions. We're transparent. Judge Meter only wants things to get better. She attacks everything that she can with the resources that were provided. We've got long-term employees. We don't have employees that have been here 3 weeks. We have employees that have been working with Saginaw kids for years and years and years, including myself. I've been involved in the business working. I wasn't always a court administrator. I worked at the ground level, working with kids in the community, in treatment facilities. I kind of know what I'm talking about. And I rely on these people to tell me when I'm not going down the right direction. So when I say other counties aren't doing as well as Saginaw, there's a lot of things we do right. For example, we don't have to really talk about a lot of the legislation. You want to know why? Because we already do it. We already do it. The average family in Saginaw County that comes through our court system, on average, after the case is done, only owes $175. So this stuff with families owing $100,000, that's true. That happened in some counties, never happened in Saginaw. We have never overburdened families in Saginaw. We don't have control over restitution, and some kids have done some things to some businesses that cost a lot of money. Can't do anything about it. Our average family, probation oversight, we work with kids for years. Families only charged $100. So when the law goes into effect in October, it doesn't really impact us.
I would like to say with restitution, you can get creative though. And what we did, there was a very large incident involving a fire that caused significant damage to the tune of $60,000, $70,000. The owner of the company was willing to forego restitution if that child provided 200 hours of community service in the local fire departments. So there's a way around restitution too. And so I wanted to say that you can be creative.
Yeah, and
So if we get rid of fines and costs, you can also work very creatively with restitution, which can be good.
I do just briefly want to say from the MCYJ perspective, I want to just explicitly say the best part of our job is knowing that there are very dedicated court folks here, because we can't do what we do without you all. So I want to make sure that we know that the community has an opportunity to also hear about the good best practices.
Yeah.
And then we're all, I think, really excited about ways we can all keep growing across the state, because you're dead on about sometimes it's a hodgepodge. Everyone's doing something differently, so it's exciting to hear. And I particularly really want to learn about risk assessments, if you can develop when you get to that part. Thank you.
So for us to change and not financially burden people is not a big deal. We charge a probationary oversight, which includes diversion, which is $100, and then we have our court fee. And so those won't be assessed to families starting October 1st. It's not a big deal. And we'll adjust and move on. Now, that money that's brought in throughout the year, mind you, you didn't ask me if I agree with it. I don't necessarily agree with it. I think families should have some ownership over their children and invest them in them doing well on probation. But regardless, we'll adjust to the law and we'll move on. In terms of the start of a kid's entrance into the system, it's a scary thing for a lot of kids. Not every kid in Saginaw comes into the court system as a bad kid. So the whole idea of diversion is to move those kids as quickly as possible out of the system. That's why we use diversion. So in Saginaw, we have a court intake officer as our diversion program manager. And every single petition that's filed by the prosecuting attorney's office, that individual reviews first before anybody else. And they do a pre-assessment. We use the YLS, the youth level of service. And that assessment will give our court intake worker an idea as to whether or not that case can be diverted. If it can go informal, it goes informal, and we move on with business. There are two issues and barriers that we'll probably ask the community for input on. Diversion doesn't always work. You want to know why? Because a lot of kids get involved in crimes that don't allow us to pursue diversion. So by statute, there are a number of offenses that don't allow us to offer diversion. They're usually assaultive type crimes or criminal sexual conduct crimes. And so kids that we feel would fit diversion, we can't use because of the crime. The other thing is the distrust of the system. We have families that just won't agree to a diversion of their child because it forces the child to acknowledge that the crime occurred. And so sometimes it takes attorneys and the judge and our referees to have conversations with families to try to get them to understand that a diversion probation or a diversion agreement is in their best interest because the child's out of the system and there's no record that follows them. So every single petition is reviewed and we divert if we can. So our diversionary program isn't going to change, and we already received monies for it. That money's not going to increase. We'll talk about the 75% because there's some challenges with that. When people say, yeah, your reimbursement goes from 50 to 75%, it's not as easy as just saying you're going to have more money in your pocket. That's not how it works. And so right now we're working on looking at what the financial impact is going to be. We know that from going from 50% reimbursement within the child care fund to 75% is going to impact Saginaw County by about $300,000. Most of that is in probation officer salary. So the first hurdle is convincing county commissioners to take that probation salary savings and putting it into in-home care programs we can use for the child care fund. And Judge Meter has already explored two with me that she would like to implement. One is bringing in a YAP program that we don't currently have. If anybody is familiar with YAP, they're an intensive service for kids who they can't function normally. See, the problem in Saginaw County is that the majority of the kids in the YLS, our risk assessment we use, that's something that's ongoing. So it gets done at the beginning of a case for a kid, and it's reevaluated at least every 6 months, or changes occur within that kid's probation. Bottom line is, when that kid reduces their risk level by a certain percentage, they're released from probation. So it's not a determined amount of time. The kid has to be on probation until this date. No, they come in and they work services. And if those services are successful and their risk is reduced, we get them out of the system as quickly as possible. We do that in Saginaw County right now with every single kid. So diversion, youth level of service for all probationers, the money's not a big deal. What other things did I want to address? Oh, detention. For the last, 6, 7 years, Judge, everybody talks about how Michigan incarcerates kids at a much higher level than the national average. I don't know if that's true in Washtenaw County. I don't know if that's true in Macomb or up in the UP. I know that it's not true in Saginaw. In 2004 in this county, we had 167 kids in residential treatment facilities. We had a capacity in detention of 56 kids, and it was full every single day. I came to the county and started working for Judge Meter in 2017. And in 2017, we had 67 kids that were in residential with a capacity of 56 kids in detention. Since that time, I can give you the numbers if you want them. In 2018, we had 42 kids in 2018, we had 42 kids in residential treatment, and our capacity in detention was reduced to 42. In 2021, our detention population was reduced to 28. So we're at half the population in 21 as we were in 17. And in 21, we had 22 kids in residential treatment. Last year, we had 2 kids in Saginaw County be removed from the community and go to residential treatment. Now, part of that's out of our control. My point is that we incarcerate kids at a lot lower rate than what I believe other counties do. So that's not a concern for us either. Status offenses we're not lodging for. So there are things that I think that we're doing well from that perspective. But where do we go from here? Well, there's a couple of things. You know, I don't know if Commissioner Coney, you're aware of Dr. Logan. We started taking,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
So we started taking a look at, and we believe, and Judge Meter will talk about it, how important it is that your employee professional work group represent the community that you're working with. You know, whether it be your attorney representation, whether it be services for kids, there have to be options and availability for every child that comes through. And so you use the term culturally sensitive or appropriate, right? So in detention specifically, since 2017, using the child care fund, mind you, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 services that are child care funded that we've brought in. And all of them were directed and geared towards children of color. So was it a need? I think so. Is it difficult sometimes? Absolutely. Do we do the best we can and try to expand and do more? Yes. So I know when I talked with Mr. Bowles, one of the things that he'd asked me is, well, what are you going to do with the child care fund, reimbursement? Well, there's 2 things that Judge Meter would like to accomplish. Number 1, the YAP program and bringing the YAP program in. We've been able and been lucky enough to have a DHHS that received a contract to use YAP in the abuse neglect side of things for a year and a half. They worked with some of our toughest families, and they were successful. Unfortunately, that contract ended, and it wasn't renewed. So Judge Meter said, Todd, I want you to figure out what we need to do to get YAP in here and use with our delinquent population. Because the reality is, we have 8% of our kids we can't control, guys. We have 8% of our kids that are shooting other people. We have 8% of our kids that aren't going to school. They've been arrested 10, 15 times this year, and service isn't impacting them. And this young lady right here said it absolutely correct. It's not the service. We have families that are broke. And no amount of child care fund reimbursement is going to fix that. Like, the community's got to figure out how do we, as a community, figure out how to help families that are broke.
I think that's
That's not what I said. I would say that's
what
right.
we're all trying to figure out is, how do we prevent it before it even
They're
gets
not
there?
talking about that.
How do we prevent our children even meeting you
Correct.
or meeting judgment? How do we prevent our families, our children from
even
even getting to that point? And you can't tell me that there is not a way to do that. 8% or 25%, there should be more impact on making sure our children never even make it.
And those families be a part of
That's right,
some
yeah.
of this before the professionals or with the professionals.
Yeah. So I guess at some point, I don't want to say confrontational, but we all have jobs. And part of my job is to ask questions and to address the current situation. Everyone here, good hearted people, I dealt with them, either worked for them or worked with them. So I know where their heart is. But for them to say that it's good, I mean, that's not my job. It's not my job to agree with them. It's my job to ask a question as to how can we get better.
Right.
And so I guess what I wanted to say is just like, as far as when you made the statement as far as, well, why is this child is in agreement to diversion? Maybe it's possible he didn't do it. And he's standing up for what he believes.
Right.
Maybe you don't
And
need
so,
to-
and then the next question is, are we handing out diversion equally amongst everybody? Are we handing it out subjectively or are we handing it out objectively? And that's why I'm here. And that's why my office is here. And so my office is not to agree with the system. My office is here to question the system. It's not to disrespect the system, but just to question it. And then when you ask us not to question it, that's why we're here. It's like, well, why are we even here? Why is there 27, 30 legislative acts to address this situation? Because it needs to be fixed. It can be fixed. It can get a bit better. And so, and I think that's why we're here. And so, I mean, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the communication. You know, Mr. Pugh, we talk, a lot of the judges talk, but all we just want is a voice and to be heard and to be able to question. And I appreciate it. You know, we talked several times.
Oh, absolutely.
And we're very open about it, but all we want is the opportunity to ask questions and to explain why it's happening. And that is being treated, because maybe the guy didn't do it, or the girl didn't do it. Right. And so you can't force, square peg and force a
Right.
Mr. Borges, can you give us more information on what those diversion programs look like that you speak of?
Yeah, the diversion program is it's similar to probation, but because it's diverted, it's geared towards restorative justice. And so we have an internship program that the court runs that oversees the diversionary caseload. And the diversion program manager oversees the case management of the system. And so kids they'll come in, and again, the child has to agree, the parents have to agree. And then it's removed it doesn't even make it to the formal calendar. It can be sent back from the formal calendar, but eventually it ends up where the child's not given or doesn't have a record for it. And for us, we design it as 3 months. And again, the new law going into place identifies not having a diversion or consent calendars, well, diversion at least, not being longer than 3 months. They would be assigned the interns from our office. The program manager would oversee the progress. And they have like simple probate diversionary program rules. They're similar to probation rules, but it's all restorative. So they'll do restorative letters. They'll do some community service. They'll do some an agreement in terms of services that they would be willing to participate in, whether it be substance abuse. Unfortunately, we have a lot of kids that will test positive for one drug or another. So a lot of times it's drug education, things of that nature. And then if they complete those requirements within a 3 month period, then they're released from the diversionary caseload and we never see them again.
Let me just say something on that. And I appreciate you hitting on all these items, but I might be looking at personal cases and go against what's in diversion. I had about 5 black young people that got arrested. The people that were around them, somebody called and they're adults. The family came where they got arrested. And everybody was telling me they wasn't doing anything. You know what they was doing? Childish things. They got a ticket.
Yeah.
So when they got a ticket, they had to go into court. So I got a lot of appreciation from the judge because the judge was trying to work it through. So I was sitting there, well, Viola Wilson from the NACP was what? I was sitting there trying, first of all, I'm dealing with a system, what you call the system.
Yeah.
And I got a judge that was really trying to work through things, was saying, oh boy, how do I take these young people? And we're gonna send them through. They're gonna get caught up in the system somewhere. First of all, let me go back. Those young people went on and finished college later. They finished college now. They have families now. And got their degrees and all of that. And they're upset right now at something that happened. I don't look at that as negative. They're not negative, okay? But they was offered the diversion. Now I'm sitting there and I'm about to try to give these young people, I don't say kids, because they don't like me to call them kids. I'm trying to give them advice. And I'm saying, no. Now their lawyer got to a point of saying, okay, we're going to take this because if you go for a while and don't do anything wrong, then it won't come around.
Right.
Yeah. I'm saying, wait a minute. Now we can say they probably won't do anything, but they won't have to take this. That's their own deal. I knew the young people. I knew their parents, and I knew they wouldn't obviously go out and do something wrong. Now that's me saying this.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna tell a lie to help them kids out. But that diversion thing came up, kind of a bad thing with them, because it took some kids that probably shouldn't have been in there anyway.
Right.
As a matter of fact, one of the, I'm gonna stop when I say this, one of the sheriffs that was on the city council, he was one of the people that talked at the city council, he was also the mayor. And he was retired from the sheriff, he was the mayor. And he had to tell the council, he said, wait, no, these are not bad people, all our kids ain't bad.
Yeah.
That's what the rest of them saying, all our kids ain't bad, they were saying, oh, I'm in a community and all kids are bad. So I'm saying that what you're saying, I'm sure you didn't just say it and saying it, but how do you get this communication before we communicate? So what all that you guys are saying, we are listening to it too. Somehow, if we don't agree with you, we can listen to it. So we've got some contradictions there, and I'm not saying you're wrong, but somehow there's some contradictions. And without that one case, I gained a lot of respect from that judge, how it was worked out and how he attempted to work out. But sometimes diversion sounds so good to some people, and it doesn't sound so good to other people.
Yeah. Well, and just to clarify something that Mr. Tibbs said, you know, if a parent brings a child into a conference, because the intake supervisor will have a meeting with the family. And if my child is being accused of something, and I believe that my child didn't do it, I'm not suggesting that child should admit to something. The diversion is an opportunity. For example, my child went to school one time and he got into trouble. He came home and we talked about it, and it was very clear to me that my child did what he is being accused of doing. And so there are consequences for that behavior. If somebody were to offer me diversion that basically says, hey, let's talk about it, you admit to what you did, you write some apology letters, and to me, going forward, if they say, then it won't be held against them in their school record. That's all diversion is. You know, and so, yeah, I think people understanding it and understanding the benefit and being explained to it. Yeah, I agree. Yes.
So real quick, I work from an agency with some of the same kids, with some of the same diversion.
Yes.
And I want to say diversion does work. It depends on the support behind the kid. Like Ms. Davis spoke earlier about the parents, like Tutu spoke earlier about the parents. And I know a lot of times when kids are getting placed on probation, there's nothing that says parents have to do these same services that their kids have to do in order to successfully discharge probation, even with the consent diversion program. So when you talk about this fund, what are we putting in this fund to make parents have to step up to the plate to say, I will be responsible to make sure my child is doing services because I have to do services? Because a lot of the failure of the kids comes from the lack of the parent support. And there's nothing touching on that here. This is all great. But when are we going to start putting in policies that if we can't hold this parent accountable to make this kid be accountable, let's do something with the parent.
Systemic.
It is.
I hate to jump in, I'm so sorry. I just want to be mindful of time, and I deeply appreciate it. Because to your point, you know, as we're going through this, I do want to stress that we were being very short and cut down. You know, this could be a 4 or 5 hour presentation if we got into the weeds. And we're not under the impression, right, that the child care fund is going to impact every county the same. We're not under the impression that every county is starting from the same kind of finish line. But what is exciting about being in spaces like this is to have conversations about those visionary programs like family therapy, like support services in schools, and to really provide community space to connect with you all, because there is a gap at times, you know what I mean? This work is heavy. The work our judges, our court administrators, like detention folks, that is hard, heavy work, and so there can be a distance. And so I did just want to pause, and I want to make sure we can get back to these last 15 minutes for any additional broader questions or answers to this question as well.
And I would just say one last thing. I know there's a lot of information in both the legislation and from what we do in Saginaw County we probably need or want answers to. We are open and transparent. If anybody wants to call the court, get a hold of me, I'll sit down and, I mean, I'm assuming that people know what the child care fund is. You might not know anything about the child care fund. So just know that if you call the 10th Circuit Family Division, ask for me, I will schedule a time, sit down, I will meet with any of you. Because all we're interested in is making sure the kids have the service that they need and that we're doing the things that are required come October 1st. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi,
Hi, everybody. My name is Cindy Lindsay. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at the Mental Health Authority in Saginaw. It's been wonderful being with you tonight. I want to mention a couple of things that were mentioned, because I think, in all transparency, there are things that you may not realize. City schools. We have mental health outreach placed inside every Saginaw City School elementary. So when we talk about prevention, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about trying to intervene early, right? Set the right path, find out what people need. That not only provides help on the scene, but it also is a good liaison into more clinical care. So that's going on. That's been our commitment for a long time. Now, if my colleague Brenda Coughlin from the Great Lakes State Health Clinics were here, she would talk about their embedded clinics inside Saginaw High and Arthur Carroll. I get it wrong, which is the newest one, and Thompson Middle School. So when we talk clinically about the needs of our kids, which are really rough right now, okay? If you work in mental health, the pandemic has not ended, okay? It has not ended. The reason that I found myself, as these ladies were mentioning, on all of these residential committees is not because I had nothing else to do, okay? It's because kids from all over the state of Michigan were placed far from home in licensed child care institutions, which are residential placement settings. In Tuscola, in Saginaw, and they were flooding the Covenant Emergency Department because their acute needs in those placements in this particularly uncanny period of time could not be managed. So there were youth up to 17 years of age probably boarding in the Covenant ED for weeks at a time. The Covenant ED, I love the Covenant. I love Covenant Hospital. I talk about often, okay, the CEO there. This is the last level 4 trauma hospital from here north on the east side of the state. So the catchment to Covenant Hospital is huge. The region is huge that draws to that emergency department. So if you've ever been there on a weekend, it's all hands on deck, okay? The responsibility of community mental health is to do all the pre-screening for anybody that needs inpatient care. And by the way, there aren't any inpatient beds, all right? It's like the most valuable commodity you could come up with, all right? So when those kids were flooding the emergency department, I found myself pulled 20% of my time, all of last year, was dealing with the needs of those kids that were coming to the ED with acute needs. Some of them, maybe 20%, probably did need an inpatient stay and they may have boarded longer. Eventually we find them a placement. But many of them needed other things that should have been provided at the CCI. And in the defense of the CCIs, honestly, they were probably understaffed. When the staff accompanying someone like that, a youth like that, into the emergency room needs to be supervised by the staff who transports, and the only thing that staff can tell my staff is their name, that's a problem. Okay? When they fall asleep while they're trying to supervise a PED, it's because they probably work through shifts, right? So I don't want to beat up on the direct care staff and CCIs because I know what that's like because my system's been short-staffed for 2 years, all right? But somebody needed to say something because something terrible was going to happen, and it did. So when they asked me to join the residential committees of the RAC, I sit on the placement criteria committee for CCIs, and I sit on the characteristics of CCIs as well as the local service delivery system for the diversion, non-placement options for our judiciary. I said, you don't really want me because I don't really have a lot of good things to say. And they said, oh, no, Erin House from the State Court Administrator's Office said, no, Stan, you gotta come. You gotta come and tell the story because people, they just don't get it. And what I find difficult is that, much to Todd Border's comments, is that when I think about my community here in Saginaw, it is so different than what I hear on screen in all these virtual meetings I'm in. I'm in, each of those committees meets twice a month and I've got to do homework in between, okay? Because we're researching, what are the evidence-based practices? What are the assessment tools? I am the voice of behavioral health on those committees. So that's what that's my swim lane, okay? So that's what brought me to this subject. To my good friend John Hughes' comments about prevention, finally, our state of Michigan has become a demonstration site for something called community behavioral health clinics, which is a really wonderful program that's going to allow community mental health across the state to open our doors wider when we never could open them before. Right? We always serve the most disabled kids, the most disabled adults, and whether you had an intellectual or developmental disability or you were on autism spectrum, whether you were a kid with social emotional disturbances or an adult with mental illness, there was clinical criteria to get into this very specialty benefit. We are now Saginaw CMH is now part of the state demonstration, which is going to put an incentive payment on top of all of our medicated counters to allow us to not only serve people who are under or uninsured, but also will allow us to open our doors wider. Nice to see you, Melvin. This is a new member of our network. Getting ready to open doors to Saginaw CMH clientele next month, right?
Yep.
The other thing I want to say that we are so blessed for in Saginaw is that we actually do collaborate really well. We've been screening for mental health over at the family court, I don't know, I think for 20 years.
Yep.
And don't you think, I've been here for almost 24, I think it's 20.
Been over there,
right?
over that, yeah.
And when we have issues with kids, we get together, we talk about it, and we work them out. I mean, today we're talking about juvenile justice, but we can have the same forum. And we can talk about the kids that are on the abuse and neglect docket, right? And child welfare. They're the same issues. So again, when I'm, representing behavioral health in these meetings for the RAC, I am so amazed by what I hear from other people. My CMH doesn't talk to me. I don't know, my family court judge won't talk to me. That's just not what happens. We just know that we're in this together, right? We don't do everything right, but we sure do try, right? And sometimes we do miraculous things. I know the hour is late and I want to say a couple of things. I think our kids are in trouble. Okay? And it doesn't matter where they are. It doesn't matter if in the city of Saginaw, if they're in Hemlock, or they're in Birchmount. Okay? And the parents and caregivers, if it's a parent or a caregiver, they're stressed too, on a good day probably. All right? So the need for behavioral health in the county of Saginaw and across the state, because I talked to my 46 colleagues across the state, we've never seen what we've seen before. In the first quarter of this year, over 275 families presented for intake. We've never seen that kind of volume before. Typically, we would see maybe 40 or 50 kids. We see more adults, but we would see maybe 40 or 50. This is overwhelming, okay? So it's all hands on deck every day. But I want to leave you with something, and that is some handouts that I had over here that I think, I don't go into public audiences anymore and not bring paper. So this is a flyer that talks about our mobile response and crisis stabilization service. Those caregivers that are just stressed out, not getting it done, right? Or you're the grandma of a daughter or a son who's not getting it done, and they need to talk. And maybe not to you. This is who they need to call. I'm very excited to say that finally we have been able to staff our mobile crisis response and stabilization service out of our Hancock building 24/7, starting next week. We were doing it till about 10 o'clock at night because we couldn't get enough staff, but we're, knock on wood, we're fully staffed now. That will allow our clinical staff, our master's prepared staff, to not only answer calls, which I would call warm calls, right? More than a referral, this is not a referral service. This is what is your issue? Let's talk about it. If you're thinking about harming yourself or harming others, let's talk about it. Let's come up with a safety plan. Let's talk about who in your life we can call upon as a resource, all right? That's the kind of conversation I'm talking about. The other users of this line are law enforcement, because they need help too. Not so much personally, but they need advice about what to do on the scene, and central dispatch, who may call us because they're hearing on the phone not a need for police or fire, or even ambulance, but they need someone to go out there and do a well check, see what's going on. Okay?
And
so I want
probation.
everybody to take one of these.
We preach mobile response. To our families.
Good.
Before they're calling law enforcement to get another charge to come back into us,
Yes.
let's try to use CMH. Let's try to use mobile response so that we don't want these families to come through our doors again.
Yeah.
We tell them we don't want to work with you guys as much as you don't want to work with us. We know that. So what else can we do? And that's, we have those printouts. We're giving those to our families because
Thank you.
if they can be calling to eliminate law enforcement intervention, that's them not coming back through to us, to law enforcement, to those things. So probation
Is
is
MUP
using it
for
also.
it's for anyone in the community or
Yes.
just community mental health?
It is now.
It is
It's
now.
for everybody because of the CCBHC status
Okay.
and our ability to not be bound by
Yeah.
Medicaid and open cases. Yes.
So does that mean the same, when you said you were expanding, like, does that mean now private insurance or just
Yes.
like people who need talk therapy, not
Anybody.
necessarily case management?
Anybody.
That
We
is
also
amazing.
have a grant to help with this too.
Okay,
Okay. So that's kind of new from
Yeah, that is
the state of Michigan.
very cool.
Yeah, we're very active in our court and from probation and the bench. I'm handing these out, please, you can call, you get in
Good.
trouble with your child and things are starting to get very, very heated, call this number, they can help you.
Right.
If you want to call them and police, you can. If you just want to call them and not even involve the police, call them.
Yeah.
They'll help.
So I don't know if people knew about, do people know about this telephone exchange called 988?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So you can also call 988 and you can get help through that, which relays actually to the state hub for crisis intervention called MyCal, which is actually staffed 24/7 by a consulting counseling firm out of Oakland County, serving the entire state. Our region, we're in Region 5, which means nothing to you, but anyway, our region is coming online with our connection to 988. We got our first call today. So those connections, I mean, the issue should be, no wrong door. Whether you call the number on the flyer or you call 988, you need a warm response that can truly be helpful to you, right? I mean, that's really what we're saying. The other thing, the hours late, is this was my hobby over the pandemic because people would follow me to my car at every meeting that I was at to talk about the behavioral health needs and their family member, and we could talk about programs, and all of our programs always had like their own brochures. What is this program about? Are you eligible? What can I expect? This is one piece, one document, one publication that speaks about everything from crisis intervention services through central access and intake, all the programs that are funded by community mental health, and in the back, all of the other, what I call adjunct things we do. Like maybe you don't know that we provide mental health consultation to child care agencies. If you take your kid to childcare and your kid or someone of that age is in danger of being expelled, and then mom's trying to figure out how do I go to work because I've lost my childcare, we try to salvage those placements. Because usually that young child has no self-regulation, right? And the staff there may not be fully equipped to deal with that behavior. So we're doing that all over the place, okay? Now, this is not a menu, all right? You can't open it up and order up a service, okay? And I say that, think of this like if you have commercial insurance and you get a description of your benefit, okay? That's more like what this is. Are you eligible for the things that are in here? Because some of these are very deep-end, very expensive services that are targeted for very specific subpopulations, right? So unless you're on the autism spectrum and you've been found eligible, you're probably not going to get applied behavioral analysis, okay? But that's not to warn you off. That's just to say, understand what this is. And the best way to find out if you're eligible is to call or to come in to central access and intake. Right now, it's going to take a while. It might take a couple weeks to get an appointment because we are so slammed, okay? So all of our vital information is here. If you don't have a copy of this, you can find it on our website, okay? So I just wanted to mention that.
Did anyone else have a comment or something they'd like to say before Jeff?
Well, I wanted to address a comment on our stream.
Oh, good.
And it's maybe a little veer off a little bit, but this person on our stream, her comment or question is, as a parent of a disabled child, I am particularly interested in the recent prosecution and conviction of a disabled student for assaulting a teacher. what are your thoughts? And this is for anybody in the room that is applicable. What are your thoughts on protecting our disabled kids in the community?
Anyone wants to chime in and comment on it?
Tough one, huh?
Not really. Everybody needs protection. Not disabled, not disabled, everyone.
If I could follow up, if there was a pathway that you can send somebody, a parent like that, who could they call? Like, I think that's the problem they run into. Like, you get a situation like that, then you don't know who to call. Like, does anybody have any? I know I don't have an idea. Is there anybody on a local, county, state level, anybody that they could call in that disabled advocacy lane?
There are a couple, and I'd be happy to comment honestly on the Facebook links to some of the broader groups, but I also think some of the hyper-local folks would know both groups potentially.
If you could share those links, appreciate it. Thank you so much.
So I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight and engaging in this very important conversation regarding our kids. Especially want to thank Judge Leader and her staff and her team for coming out, and everyone from the community, because it's going to take a collective effort for us to see the type of change that we would like to see among our kids. And so I'll bring Jeff back up at this time. Jen, do you have any closing or final remarks?
Just that this was hopefully just an icebreaker conversation, because these reforms, again, 19 bills, let me tell you, it was ugly to read. It was a lot. And so this is a good place to start. And I also do want to say that when local officials and local staff come to these cases, I personally believe communities are already in a good starting, I don't even want to say starting, but are in a good place, because there are a lot of counties where folks don't show up, and you all showed up, and I think that's really exciting. So thank you so much for having us, and we have sign-up sheets here if you want our emails, legislative breakdowns if you want to read more, and my card if you want to have on.
All right, if we can give MCYJ a hand, please. Thank you so much. And also, thank you to our local and county dignitaries for coming and giving your expertise and just all the work that you do. I know it's often a thankless job, people, but thank you so much for your advocacy and all the work that you do. Before I close, I wanted to maybe throw something your way. This topic, of course, isn't new, but I wanted to raise a flag to something that we've been doing, myself and Danita, we've been doing quietly for probably the last 7 months. We've been kind of meeting with people behind the scenes, our county prosecutor, Mr. McCogan, and other judges and people in the system. This speaks to the work that we've been doing behind the scenes. We want to create a diversionary program. That's what we want to do as CAP and with other partners in the community. So, those of you that are here that, honestly, we would need, your expertise, maybe your thoughts on what would make up a good diversionary program for juveniles and on up. We're going to be reaching out to you. So if we could have your support, we could have your ear, we really appreciate it. Other than that, again, thank you so much. And we have food left, I believe. So please take it. Please take it. I don't want to take it home. But thank you. Please do that. But again, thank you so much.